This is part 6 of God Speaks by Meher Baba, Summary of States of Divine Consciousness. After taking human form and gaining full consciousness, that full consciousness which the Atma craved in order to experience Paramatma, the Atma still does not experience Paramatma, because even after attaining full consciousness, as long as this consciousness remains centered in gross impressions, the Atma perforce is made conscious of the gross body and must therefore experience the gross world. Hi. I just started. Without having human form, it is impossible for the Atma or soul to gain consciousness of subtle and mental bodies and of self. Similarly, it is impossible to gather experience of the subtle world, the mental world, and of Paramatma, the Oversoul. For the evolution of consciousness, and for the evolution of form, and for the experience of the gross material world, it is absolutely necessary to have gross sanskaras, impressions, and as long as there are gross impressions, the Atma has no consciousness of the subtle and mental body. So it's saying, as long as you are under the impression that you are a human being, then you cannot experience the subtle and mental world, only the material one. In human form, because of the evolution of full consciousness, and because of the evolution of perfect form in the shape of a human being, and because of having taken full experience of the gross world, material world, there is now no more need of gross impressions. Gross impressions can become subtle impressions can become mental impressions, and mental impressions can disappear. So in human form, the Atma, soul, can have consciousness of the subtle and mental bodies and of Atma itself, and experience of the subtle world, mental world, and of Paramatma, the Oversoul. But the tragedy is that immediately after gaining full consciousness in human form, the Atma does not gain consciousness of subtle and mental bodies and self, and likewise does not experience the subtle and mental worlds, and does not have experience of Paramatma. And I'll talk about this at the end. This is because gross sanskaras do not become subtle sanskaras, or mental sanskaras, nor disappear immediately after the Atma has gained full consciousness in human form. The reason for this is that the first human form made out of the last animal form, when dropped, leaves behind a legacy of impressions of the first human form, and then each following incarnated human form is made up of the last human form, sanskaras, impressions. So the Atma, in spite of having full consciousness, takes a number of human forms as long as gross sanskaras exist. So this kind of answers something I was wondering when we were reading before, so earlier it said, so there's 4 different planes or worlds or ways of experiencing the world. The first is the gross world, which is just the material world. The second is the subtle world, it's the domain of energy. The third is the mental world, which is the domain of mind, which consists of feelings and thoughts. And then there's the fourth one is the Oversoul, which is Paramatma, which is being like one with everything, basically, if you were to apply it to Buddhism. And this is saying that in human form, you can experience all of these, is what I'm gathering from what I just read. And human form is, basically. It just takes a number of reincarnations to, because we have so many impressions, because we believe that we're human, and we believe that we're You know, like, and if it's your first reincarnation as a human, you still believe that you're kind of an animal in a way. I guess maybe not, but so sanskaras. It says sanskaras in here. That means impressions, and those are those impressions of what you believe you are. It's kind of like Buddhism. This is God Speaks by Meher Baba, and it kind of claims to be the kind of the truth in all religions, kind of bringing it all together and bringing out the truth in all of them. So the Buddhist wheel is in this picture, as well as like the cross and like other things. So I'll keep reading. Eventually, one of two things happens. The Atmas, or soul, gross sanskaras may entirely disappear all of a sudden, and the Atma lose consciousness of the gross body and gain consciousness of the self, thus losing the experience of the gross world and gaining experience of Paramatma. So it sounds like what I said earlier was a little wrong, because once you are in the Paramatma, you are not really human anymore, perhaps, I think. Yeah. Or the second, more likely possibility is that eventually the gross material sanskaras, or impressions, will fade and become subtle sanskaras. Subtle sanskaras fade more and become mental sanskaras, and finally mental sanskaras fade to such an extent that they disappear. In this case, the Atma, soul, first loses consciousness of the gross body and the experiences of the gross world, and gains consciousness of the subtle body and experience of the subtle world. Actually, I think I'm wrong again, because maybe it means that you're just meditating like so hard that you just forget that you're in a body, perhaps. Then the Atma loses consciousness of the subtle body and gains consciousness of the mental body, and loses experience of the subtle world and gains experience of the mental world. Finally, the Atma loses consciousness of the mental body, thereby gaining consciousness of the Atma itself, self-realization, and loses the experience of the mental world and gains experience of Paramatma. After the Atma, so wilderness, which vibration, amen. After the Atma has gained self-consciousness and experiences the Paramatma, the Atma inherits one of the three states, not 2 or 4 states, but 3 states definitely. First, state A. So this is after the Atma gains self-consciousness and experiences like the oversoul. Earlier we talked about the Atma being a drop of water in an infinite ocean, and the ocean is the Paramatma, which is like the oversoul. And it says that this is kind of like all souls are one. The one is the all is the one kind of take. So after you get all the way to, you've evolved and involved all the way to God realization, self-realization, there are 3 states, and this is first state A. Soon after the experience of the highest of the high, the soul generally drops all of its shadowy bodies, gross, subtle, and mental, and eternally enjoys individualized experience as a whole, the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss of God, without using the attributes thereof. Interesting. First state B. The Atma may not drop these 3 bodies until some time afterwards, although it is absolutely unconscious of these bodies, except that it retains the bodies. Its state is actually the same as A. Oh, okay, so that's like the second half of the first state. Option B of the first state. Interesting. Second state. I'm no expert on this. The Atma retains the 3 bodies, and simultaneously with self-consciousness is also conscious of its 3 shadows, gross, subtle, and mental bodies, and at the same time experiences the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss of God. It also experiences the gross world, subtle world, and mental world as God's shadows, but it does not use the power, knowledge, and bliss of God for the other Atmas who are mental conscious, subtle conscious, and gross conscious, and so it is independent. Wow. The third state. This is exactly like the second state, except that the Atma uses its infinite power, knowledge, and bliss in making gross conscious Atmas subtle conscious, and subtle conscious Atmas mental conscious, and mental conscious Atmas self-conscious, even at one stroke, making gross conscious Atmas self-conscious. So I think what that means is that you are God-realized, but you're still on earth and you're helping people, helping raise people up to higher states of consciousness. It's hard to, even for me, it's pretty hard to wrap my head around all this. So next chapter, full development of subtle and mental bodies in human form and involution of consciousness. I need some water. Thanks for the likes. My throat's a little off today. Only in the human form are subtle and mental bodies fully developed. Therefore, even when the Atma has gross consciousness and is unconscious of pran and mana, it does work through pran and mana, not directly, but on the gross plane. So even if the gross conscious human Atma is unconscious of pran and mana, and therefore does not realize energy and mind, it can use energy through various aspects of energy, and it can use mind through various aspects of mind, such as thoughts, desires, and emotions. So pran is energy, and mana is mind. Make sure I didn't miss anything. All right. In the human form, when the Atma or soul has subtle consciousness, it is unconscious of the gross or physical and mental bodies, yet it does work through sharir and mana, not directly. Sharir is the gross body, which is physical, and mana is mental. So let me just start that sentence over. In the human form, when the Atma has subtle consciousness, it is unconscious of the gross sharir and mental mana bodies, yet it does work through sharir and mana, not directly, but on the subtle plane. So even if the subtle conscious human Atma is unconscious of sharir and mana, and therefore does not realize the gross and mental worlds, it can use the gross through various aspects of the gross, as eating, drinking, sleeping, seeing, feeling, hearing, etc. And it can use mind through various aspects of the mind, as thoughts, desires, and emotions. It's interesting. It seems to me that we're just experiencing all these things at once. And I'm still confused. I guess this is explaining it, but how we can, because earlier it said that, like, if you're in the material world, you're in the material world. If you're in the subtle world, you're in the subtle world. If you're in the mental world, you're in the mental world. So mental, all right, I'll just keep reading. In the human form, when the Atma has mental conscious, it is unconscious of the gross and subtle bodies, but it does work through sharir and pran, not directly, but on the mental plane. So even if basically it's saying, even if you're not aware of, it's basically saying, like, there's the gross plane sharir, the subtle plane pran, and the mental plane mana. And if you're on one, you might not be aware of the others, but you can still work through the other planes to have an effect on that plane. I think that's what's. I think I got it now. All right. So even if the mental conscious human Atma is unconscious of Sharir and Pran and therefore does not realize the gross and subtle worlds, it can use the gross through various aspects of the gross, such as eating, sleeping, seeing, feeling, hearing, etc. And it can use energy through various aspects of energy, such as nuclear, etc. To give a simile, let us consider, for instance, a gross conscious human Atma as a soul on earth, which we take as a standard for the gross plane, far flung from the sun, which, for instance, for the purpose of our simile only, we take as the source of energy of the subtle and the source of mind of the mental. The simile of the sun and earth must never be misconstrued as the sun and earth of the solar system. I don't know what this means. Hold up, Corey. No, I'm not playing guitar tonight. I'm just reading bedtime stories. Some very dense spiritual wisdom here. This sun, so, alright, the simile, the Atma is I'm just gonna keep reading. This sun, which we have now adopted as our standard, sheds its rays of energy and mind continuously and simultaneously on the earth, which we have taken as the standard for the gross. Okay, so yeah, it's just saying that the sun, the way the sun kind of projects its energy on the earth, it's kind of affecting the earth without being like a part of earth. This is God Speaks by Meher Baba. And feel free to ask any questions. I'm happy to try to figure them out with you. All right, so I'll start that paragraph. The sun, which we have now adopted as our standard, sheds its rays of energy and mind continuously and simultaneously on the earth, which we have taken as a standard for the gross or physical world. Whenever I say gross, it means physical, material world. And the gross conscious human soul on earth, conscious only of the gross, unconsciously imbibes from the sun's rays of the energy of the subtle, by making in the gross world the fullest use of the aspects of this energy in the form of nuclear energy. Also, this gross conscious human soul on earth unconsciously makes use in the gross world of the aspects of mind such as thoughts, desires, and emotions, which it also imbibes from the sun's rays. Yeah, right? Bedtime stories. Yeah, I cut my hair just because I felt like it. I don't know. And I need a job, I guess. For the purpose of continuing our simile, we shall now take the subtle conscious human soul as a soul in air, and hence much nearer this sun than the gross conscious human Atma on earth. This subtle conscious human soul is in air, is conscious of the subtle, consciously imbibes the fullest energy from the sun, which is the source of energy, and consciously makes use of this tremendous energy in its nascent form. I don't know what that word means. Thus, this subtle conscious human soul is capable of wielding tremendous power and is quite capable of giving sight to the blind or limbs to the maimed. This is the domain of the first three planes, and the capability of this soul to liberate energy in any intensity is achieved according to the degree of subtle consciousness gained by it in the second and third planes. We doing miracles over here. Yeah, no worries, Corey. Take it easy. Yeah, that's a really good point, Sky. Like, let this... Like, if you wish, let this information wash over you. That's a great way to just get it into your subconscious mind. And then the next time you hear it, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. That is how I've done it. It works. While this subtle conscious human soul in its realm of energy consciously makes use of energy in its nascent state, it is unconscious of the mental. Does anyone know what nascent means? It's Nascent. If anyone can tell me what that means. I'm guessing it means like dormant or the opposite of dormant. I don't even know. Therefore, unconsciously, it makes use of the aspects of mind, such as thoughts, desires, and emotions. Thus, though it is capable of wielding tremendous power through its consciousness of energy, it is susceptible to getting entangled by mind while making use of the aspects of mind unconsciously. For this reason, the subtle conscious human soul, although mighty powerful, sometimes slides down to the lower level of subtle consciousness while making conscious use of its energy in the form of miraculous powers. To be more, guys, we are capable of some serious power if we lock in. To be more precise, the subtle conscious human soul is either in the first or second or third plane, according to the degree of subtle consciousness gained. Or one may say that the domain of the subtle sphere comprises the first, second, and third planes. Now, the fourth plane is that state of consciousness which draws a line of demarcation between the domain of the subtle world and the domain of the mental world. In other words, the subtle conscious human Atma on the fourth plane is like a human soul standing on the threshold of the mental world, which delimits the subtle world from the mental world. Therefore, the subtle conscious human soul at the stage of consciousness of the fourth plane is fully conscious of the first, second, and third planes, and experiences in full the subtle world, and so is completely conscious of the tremendous energy of the subtle world. Thus, this human soul on the threshold of the mental world, commanding the energy at its height, is now nearest to the domain of mind, which is the mental world, and thus is more susceptible to the overpowering forces of the aspects of the mind, i.e., the thoughts, desires, and emotions. And although this subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane consciously makes use of the subtle world's energy at its zenith, it is still unconscious of mind. It therefore unconsciously makes use of the aspects of mind, which are now too overpowering and thus most alluring for this soul, which, so to speak, as to face and bear the full blast of the aspects of the mind, thoughts, desires, and emotions at their highest. So, yeah, right? So, what I just thought while reading that is I'm comparing this to the higher self. So perhaps when they refer to mind, it's our higher self and the way our higher self kind of thinks for us and kind of guides us without us being conscious of it at all. I think there might be something there. The planes by mirroring pictures of nature. Excellent. I would like to hear more about that. That's very cool. And that makes sense to me. Very cool. This situation for the human soul on the fourth plane is extremely dangerous, since it is extremely treacherous. Here, the soul, equipped with highest energy, which can be put to use either for the best or for the worst, has to maintain a sort of equilibrium of two forces at their zenith, like the height of the energy of the subtle world and the overpowering height of aspects of the mind of the mental world. If this human soul on the fourth plane, oh cool, I'll check it out. Something I've read earlier is that I forgot what I was going to say. I'm just going to keep reading. If this human soul on the fourth plane, while unconsciously using the aspects of mind, is overcome by overpowering allurements of the aspects, thoughts, desires, and emotions, he then cannot resist using energy at its climax for the worst by performing powerful miracles such as raising the unalived, curing the blind, the sick, and the maimed, etc., just to satisfy his own overpowering desires. He is even capable of creating the whole world of forms with all of its creation. So great is the power obtained from the energy at its height, of which this subtle conscious human soul is conscious. Right, that's what I was going to say. So there's 7 planes in the process of involution. Once you become a human, you've completed your evolution of consciousness, and you start involving back in towards God or yourself. And at any of those stages, there's no going back except for this 4th plane, where if you misuse your power, what we read earlier is that you go back all the way to the beginning of the evolution of consciousness. You go back to like the gaseous or rock forms. So that's where you gotta be. That's like a test, kind of, it seems like. Thus, this misuse of energy at its zenith through the medium and the overpowering allurements of the aspects of mind, also at their zenith, creates a sort of tremendous, irreparable short circuit in the 2 fundamental supernatural forces of energy at its zenith in the shape of stupendous power, and of the mind at its zenith in the shape of irresistible desire, resulting in an unimaginably tremendous clash and explosion in the advanced consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul on the 4th plane. Absolute disturbance is thus created in the consciousness of this soul, resulting in downright disintegration of the advanced consciousness of this human soul. Thereupon, the subtle conscious human soul invariably falls to the lowest level of consciousness, which is the most finite type of consciousness of the crudest form. Therefore, this human soul has to take the form of stone and has again to go through the process of evolution. I guess they reiterated it for us. I didn't need to. Next chapter is example of a gross conscious scientist. Interesting. They haven't mentioned the word scientist before. Water here. Thanks for staying with me, you guys. I appreciate it. I hope you gain from this as much as I do. Let us try to explain this situation by an illustration of what sometimes occurs, even on the gross plane, to an ordinary human being who handles tremendous power and who is, more often than not, overcome by an intense desire to demonstrate his powers. Let us compare then a subtle conscious human soul on the 4th plane, such as described above, with a great scientist of repute in the gross world, the latter being fully conscious of the gross plane by sheer dint of effort and much investigation into the fields of the science of energies, fully realizes the possibility of releasing tremendous energy through certain experiments. This scientist, we will assume for the purposes of our illustration, gradually becomes fully conscious of the tremendous energy that has come within this reach and which will ultimately come under his complete control. He then desires intensely to make use of it. Reminds me of the guy that invented the A-bomb or whatever. Oh, I can't say that on TikTok. Whoops. Even when this gross conscious scientist in the gross world is conscious of the highest possible gross aspect of energy, he is not at all conscious of that energy in its nascent state, which is only of the domain of the subtle world and which can only be experienced and controlled by the subtle conscious human soul, and which can never under any circumstances be experimented with or experienced by any gross conscious human being. Therefore, when this gross conscious scientist in the gross world on Earth is conscious of the highest possible gross aspects of nuclear energy, he is actually fully conscious of only one of the highest gross aspects of energy in the domain of the subtle world. And when the scientist who is conscious of one of the highest gross aspects of energy, which is now entirely under his control, is overpowered by an intense desire, which is also the highest aspect of mind of the mental world, to use it, then the scientist's whole career hangs in the balance and is thus very often at stake. It is at this juncture of conflicting thoughts which on the one hand provoke the scientist to demonstrate his powers, and on the other hand soothe him to become reticent, that the scientist has to be extremely careful to maintain an equilibrium, that is, balancing the tremendous aspects of energy at his disposal. It rests with him either to use it for the welfare of the world or to misuse it for its devastating effects, or not to use it at all. He is confronted with the irresistible, overpowering force of the predominant aspect of the mind in the shape of intense desires which haunt him with fame, name, and power, tickling his ego to the utmost towards selfish ends, irrespective of the potential destruction and devastation which can be wrought. And if you're just joining, this is an analogy for the soul's involution of consciousness of 7 planes. When you reach the 4th one, if you misuse your powers, you go all the way back to the beginning of the evolution of consciousness, and you take on a gaseous form or a rock form after. If the scientist succumbs, therefore, to his overweening desire, which is now at its zenith, and is thereby directed for his selfish ends to misuse the power that he controls in the form of one of the highest aspects of energy, he then consciously leads himself to attempt to explode the most unalively weapon in his control, more powerful than, say, the largest hydrogen B word. I gotta censor myself for TikTok, it's kind of hard. It is at this stage that the crucial point is reached. The scientist explodes his weapon, spreading devastating results, and the equilibrium which was thus far very narrowly maintained between the use of power and overpowering desire is absolutely disturbed. This scientist could not content himself and was incapable of maintaining an equilibrium or balance between the tremendous aspect of energy that lay latent in his weapon, which fortified him with power, and the intense desire to explode the weapon consciously, unmindful of the unimaginable result. The tragedy of the whole thing was that this scientist, being conscious of and intensely self-interested in the results of the explosion of the bomb, was the first to be directly affected by the blast of the explosion, despite all of the necessary precautions taken. The immediate consequence to himself was that at first he was completely overpowered by his own experiment and was aghast, and he fell flat on the ground, absolutely unconscious. To add to this tragedy, when he regained his consciousness, he regained it at what cost? He had completely forgotten his state as a great and advanced scientist, and he was also incapable of remembering his immediate past, his boyhood, and his activities as a young man, with all of their associations with wife, children, and friends. I guess he got dementia from the blast. The greatest change that took place in him was that he did not even feel that he had lost anything. His memory and his consciousness of being a great scientist. The doctors call such an occurrence a case of amnesia, more accurate, yeah. He had consciousness only of the fact that he was a man of the most rudimentary type. He then started his life afresh, never once imagining that he had lived the life of a great man of science. who had under his control vast and tremendous forces of energy. In a similar fashion occurs the tragedy of the most advanced, subtle, conscious human soul on the fourth plane. He, being energy personified, misuses the energy at its zenith in the subtle world, and consequently loses all consciousness except the most finite consciousness, which, according to the law of evolution, has to take the most crude form of stone to experience that most finite consciousness. Oh, thank you for the gifts. I appreciate you guys. That's awesome. One of the functions of perfect masters is to guard. I'll say real quick, perfect masters are people who have already attained everything there is to attain, and they're just hanging out on Earth. There's always 5 of them on the planet at one time. If one drops the body, another one gains consciousness. And you cannot achieve God realization without the help of 5 perfect masters. That is one exception to being able to go through this spiritual journey all on your own. So I'll continue. One of the functions of perfect masters is to guard the soul of the fourth plane from wrecking his spiritual career through the misuse of divine powers. Very often, if the soul of the fourth plane is about to lose control of his mind, his powers are snatched away by the perfect masters, who can control the minds of all subtle conscious and gross conscious souls. But they don't misuse that power. The cases of actual downfall are accordingly rare and occur as exceptions to the rule. They must ultimately be attributed not to any failure in the vigilance maintained by the perfect masters, but to the original urge within God himself. So it is literally true that each and everything, small or great, that happens in the universe happens only according to the will of the Almighty. Dang. There is an excerpt here. Being asked by the editors about Jesus' temptations, Meher Baba replied, "The truth is that Jesus was not tempted by Satan, but that Jesus got himself tempted, and he overcame the temptations. There was a great purpose behind this. He had to get himself tempted. Thereby he shouldered the burden of the forces of temptations that predominated in the world. Jesus then overcame all the temptations, and in that way created a tremendous force which acted as a great setback to the forces of universal temptations. The same was true in the case of Buddha, and it is the same every time in avataric periods. Whenever God manifests on earth as avatar, his godhood gives a universal push, and the result is universal. Not only the humanity reaps the benefit, but everything in the whole creation reaps the benefit of the universal push." Wow, that's kind of cool. Something I'm reminded of that I've learned a long time ago is about the avataric ages. I think it's very interesting how these religions and gods are spaced out kind of evenly, and Baba says that they are reincarnations of the same consciousness, which is not separate from our consciousness, by the way. We just have the impression that we are not. Or sanskara. Here it is important to know that though it is an established fact that once full consciousness is gained in the human form, it is virtually never lost. Yet in this case of the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane, there is the possibility of losing the consciousness gained. This occurs if the powers of the fourth plane are misused, and if the equilibrium is not maintained with the highest energy at command, counterbalanced by the overpowering allurement of infinite desires, which are the highest aspect of mind, though the three fundamental aspects of mind are thoughts, desires, and emotions, the desires form the higher aspect of mind. That's interesting. So mind is made up of desires, thoughts, desires, and emotions. And apparently desires are the highest aspect of mind, which I would think would be emotions, but no. The fourth dimension is kind of spooky, isn't it? I guess, as if our will is good, then there's nothing to worry about. And then even then, if we mess up, we have the perfect masters to save us from ourselves. And even then, if we fail, it was meant to be. It was God's plan all along. So there's really nothing to worry about, because souls are infinite, indestructible, and formless. And there was one more: infinite, indestructible, and invincible. But if the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane does not misuse the energy commanded by it, and maintains the equilibrium by discrete use of infinite energy for the best, then this soul on the fourth plane not only crosses this threshold of the fourth plane and enters the domain of the fifth and sixth planes of the mental world, but gains consciousness of the sixth plane directly. This is because the soul, with subtle conscious and discrete use of energy at its zenith, was capable of overcoming and resisting the most alluring and overpowering highest aspects of mind, the desires, thoughts, and emotions, which were most powerfully treacherous at their zenith. Thus, this subtle conscious human soul gains directly the consciousness of the sixth plane by overpowering the desires, thoughts, and emotions at their zenith, and becomes their master, who now controls them and even has the capacity to create them. Wow. Yeah. Some subtle conscious human souls neither use nor misuse the tremendous flood of energy at its height, liberated in the subtle world. And when such souls do not fall prey to their desires, which are also at their height, these subtle conscious human souls cross the threshold of the fourth plane and gain the consciousness of the fifth plane in the domain of the mental world. Here, these mental conscious human souls are no longer the slaves of their minds, because they are now conscious of the first state of mind, which controls thoughts. Just want to say how much I love how raw this material is. It really just breaks down like all of these things that people think that you can't ever figure out, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, these are like the big questions that no one has answers to, but this dude is just breaking it down like it's nothing. My bro. All right. Ourselves. The mental conscious human souls on the fifth and sixth planes are now fully conscious of mind and experience the mental world according to the degree of advancement of consciousness of the fifth and sixth planes. These mental conscious human souls of the fifth and sixth planes are no longer conscious of the degrees of consciousness of the first, second, third, and fourth planes of the subtle world, nor do they experience the subtle world any longer. Therefore, these mental conscious human souls are unconscious of the tremendous energy of the subtle world. Hence, these mental conscious human souls, although they are conscious masters of mind, are now absolutely unconscious of the power of energy of the subtle world. And it is for this reason that these mental conscious human souls never can perform any miracles, They can neither raise the unalived, nor can they give sight to the blind, nor limbs to the maimed, in spite of their advanced consciousness being greater than the consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul. So there's no way to misuse your power at that point. Right? However, as these mental conscious human souls are the conscious masters of mind, they can create and control the minds of the gross conscious and subtle conscious human souls. For them, creating and controlling minds is but child's play if necessary. I imagine something they don't want to do because they wouldn't want to mess with the soul's evolution of consciousness. Unless you're on the fourth plane about to do something bad. In the case of the mental conscious human soul, let us suppose that its position is near the sun, which we have taken for our standard as a simile. They're not talking about the real sun. It's just a metaphor. This soul in the human form consciously imbibes and controls the aspects of mind, such as thoughts, desires, and emotions, and makes in the mental world the fullest use of mind, which proceeds from the sun, which we, for our purpose of explanation, consider as the source. Thus, the mental, conscious human soul in the realms of the fifth and sixth planes is not only fully conscious of the mind and its aspects, but it is also capable of creating and controlling the thoughts, desires, and emotions of all other minds too. The soul is now quite stable and can never fall or slide down to any lower levels of consciousness, as could the subtle conscious human soul in the fourth plane, because the gross conscious human soul and subtle conscious human souls are the slaves of their minds, whereas the mental conscious human soul is the master of his mind. Wow. Finally, the case of the self-conscious human soul is like a soul in the sun itself. While trying to understand the explanation, one should bear in mind that the reference to the sun is given only as a form of simile. One must not misunderstand the sun as our earthly sun, like I said, nor misunderstand our earthly sun as the real standard of the infinite and eternal source of infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, nor must we attach any significance whatsoever to our earth's sun, for our earth's sun is nothing but one of the objects of creation of the soul's own creating. You made that. This self-conscious human soul of the seventh plane is conscious of this sun, which we have taken as an example of the source of energy and mind. And although he invariably experiences and radiates eternally the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, in some cases, such as a soul also makes use of this infinite power, knowledge, and bliss directly and consciously for the emancipation of souls from the sanskaras of the gross, subtle, and mental worlds. And that is the end of part 6. On to part 7, the sevenfold veil. Say veil, yeah. The sevenfold veil. It is not a meal that is not cool to make. It is a veil. The sevenfold veil. Kabir was a perfect master as well as a poet. That's Kabir. Kabirwani, his book of poems, is therefore the more unique because of his lucid expositions on God, love for God, the divine path, and illusory creation. Being a perfect master, Kabir has said things as much for the man in the street as for the initiate. He does not hesitate to disclose, both allegorically as well as in plain words, some of the spiritual secrets, which, though within the grasp of ordinary man, are yet known only to the spiritually illumined ones who alone truly understand the deeper meaning underlying most of his sayings. There are yogis, those who practice a systematic course of esoteric knowledge, who can of themselves suspend their physical bodies in mid-air during the time they are in a temporary samadhi trance. There are some who can bodily walk on water or fly in the air without the aid of external means, and yet all this is no sign or proof of their having experienced divine love. Weighed on spiritual scales, these miracles have no value whatsoever. In fact, miracle mongering by the average yogi is not only pulls apart from the spiritual path, but is actually a hindrance to the individual's evolution towards spiritual progress. The following incident in the life of a Hindu master shows the disregard in which it is held by perfect masters, who are truth personified. The master was one day by the river's edge waiting for one of the little ferry boats that takes passengers across the stream for the diminutive fare of 1 anna. A yogi, seeing him thus waiting, came upon him, literally walked across the river and back, and said, "That was much easier, was it not?" The master, smiling, replied, "Yes, and had less value than that of the boat fare, 1 anna." Wow. I like how it really does back up, like, Jesus's teachings. I've never been Christian or anything, but I've always had respect to Jesus, and he talks about how the miracles, he talks about all these miracles in the same way, like you can walk on water and check it out. Of course, I think he had a reason to do that, unlike this Hindu master who was being silly. But it just kind of relates to all these other religions. I guess that's the whole idea. A bit of water here. Let's see how much is left on this chapter. 1, 2, 3, 4. Got about 6 more pages, and then I'll stop for the night. The ability to exercise constant control over one's low desires is no mean achievement. Success in establishing a lasting sublimation of all desires is indeed a greater one, but the greatest is the burning away of all one's desires once and for all, which divine love alone can do. And there is never any show about divine love. This burning in love is always without smoke, without show. There are times when an outward expression of God love may amount to heroism, but to make at any time a mere show of one's love for God, for the sake of show, amounts to an insult to God. That is why Kabir says that in the act of meditation, when one assumes an asan posture to meditate upon God, one should at that time learn to avoid making any display such as the swaying motion of one's body, even if it is only for one's own gratification. As compared with dreams, the physical life is indeed a reality. Similarly, compared with the reality of the path, the world and all worldly life is vacant dreaming on the part of humankind. But as the world and all of its experiences are illusory, so is the spiritual path that leads to reality. The former may be termed false illusion, and the latter real illusion. Nevertheless, despite the vast difference between them, they are both illusions, for God alone is the only reality. That is messing with my head. That was confusing. Compared with the reality of the path, the physical world is but a dream. But God realization makes the path seem like a vacant dream, I think is what I got from that. Butterfly, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. We're reading God Speaks by Meher Baba, some very dense spiritual, book. So, all right, where was I? When knowledge is gained, ignorance is banished. But for ignorance to go, knowledge must be gained. On the one hand, God and the capacity of man to see and become one with God are always there. On the other hand, truth remains hidden from the man until he actually arrives the path or realizes God. This apparent anomaly is due to two different factors: man's ignorance of truth and the fact that truth is beyond the faculty of reason and far, far above the sphere of intellect. The fact remains that man has become God, and man can become God for the simple reason that knowingly or unknowingly man is God. And when it says man, just think human. It means human. It's not gender specific. Only so long as man's ignorance lasts will there seem to be no end to the plural diversity of illusory things. When divine knowledge is gained, he realizes that there is no end to the indivisible oneness of God. Under the illusion of cosmic duality, the apparent separation between man and God is invariably referred to by masters in terms of the intervenient veil and curtain. Hafiz, who was a perfect master as well as a great poet, says, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Hafiz, but he is indeed a great poet. It's in another language, and then the translation. Alright, so here's Hafiz's words. There is no barrier between the lover and beloved. Hafiz, lift yourself aside. You are yourself, the covering over self. Kabir, that's the end of it. Kabir, referring to the removal of the 7 folds of the veil, says, "Open the folds of your veil and you shall find God." Wow. Good evening. If you're just joining us, this is God Speaks by Meher Baba. The gangat literally means the covering that a woman extends over her head and face in a number of folds. In spiritual parlance, it represents the heavy folds of ignorance that keep man hidden from his real identity. The lifting of it fold by fold corresponds to the stage-by-stage journey of a pilgrim from the first through the 5th plane of the divine path. The veil that separates a man in ignorance from God, who is all knowledge, is so subtle that even the highest and finest thought cannot pierce through it. This veil consists of 7 folds of 7 different deep colors. Each fold is tied with a separate knot. Thus there are 7 knots to the 7 folds. The 7 colors represent the 7 root desires corresponding to the 7 fundamental impressions: lust, greed, anger, etc. Connected with the 7 openings of sensations in the face: mouth, right nostril, left nostril, right ear, right eye, left eye. In reality, I wish I knew more about what he was talking about. Whatever religion that is, where you have 7 different knots and 7 folds. But I'm sure it's some Eastern religion. Thanks for the hearts. In reality, and as the one only reality, the soul is always God, without beginning and without end. False illusion begins with the descent of the soul in 7 material stages, and real illusion ends with the ascent of the soul to the 7th spiritual plane. God is a macrocosm, God is a microcosm, and God is also always beyond both. Knowingly, man is body and man is mind, but unknowingly, as in deep sleep, man is also beyond both. Analogically, it is true that man is made in the image of God. The top of his head represents the Vidyan Bhumika Arsh Ela, the highest spiritual state, or the seat of Brahman. I think that's Hindu, Brahman. Don't quote me on that. And then obviously there's some Christian references there. The forehead corresponds to the entrance to divinity. The center of the forehead, just above the two external eyes, is the seat of the inner or third eye. When the veil with all its 7 folds is finally removed, man is then able, through the third eye, to see God face to face, and sees him more actually and naturally than what he is ordinarily able to see of his body and the world throughout the 2 external eyes. In order to arrive at the divine entrance situated in the forehead, man has to pass through 7 doors, as represented by the 7 physical openings in the face. I don't think Meher Baba ever spoke on psychedelics other than LSD, kind of warning us against that. But I'd be interested to what he thinks about the more intense ones that I don't want to list for fear of TikTok shutting down my life. When an initiate succeeds in actually entering the divine path, it is for him a single 7-in-1 achievement, and it applies to the first of the 7 folds of the veil. 1. Unfastening of the first knot. 2. Disappearance of the first fold. 3. Crushing out of the first root desires. 4. Wiping out of the relative fundamental impressions. 5. Doing away with the first of the 7 deep dark colors. 6. Entrance through the first door, as represented by the mouth. And 7. Arriving on the first plane of the subtle sphere, the Pranbhuvan, or the Alam-i-Malakut. In dreams, an ordinary man is able to make partial use of his subtle body with his subtle consciousness, but only in respect to gross experience and concerning only gross objects. Just as he experiences the gross world with full gross consciousness through his gross body. Gross just means material, by the way, or physical, or 3D. So the initiate on the first plane begins to experience the subtle world with subtle consciousness through his subtle body. So in dreams, a man is able to make partial use of his subtle body with subtle consciousness, but it's mainly just a physical thing. Even in a dream, that's funny. If the initiate is able to proceed further and manages to maintain progress, he continues in the subtle sphere up to the 4th plane. This progress involves the 2nd and 3rd successive single 7-in-1 achievements that parallel the 7-fold results achieved in the first. This passing through the 2nd and 3rd doors, represented by the right and left nostrils, brings a still greater intensification of the real illusion, i.e., higher consciousness of the path. After going through the 2nd door, the initiate realizes even more the wonderful things of the subtle world, and at the same time begins to run the risk of being lost in the maze of wonderment. The mystical enchantments of the path beyond the 3rd door are still greater, and so also are the chances of becoming spellbound by them. Just as those with gross consciousness take the gross sphere and its illusory experiences to be real, so the pilgrims in the subtle sphere, while absorbed in the wonder of the plane on which they are, may mistake it for the ultimate reality. Hence, a pilgrim often gets stuck on a plane, deluded by its raptures into accepting it as the goal until a perfect master or even mental conscious souls help him by pushing him on to the next plane. Wow. But luckily we've read this book and we know not to get trapped there, and we'll know when we aren't fully. That kind of reminds me of psychedelics too, how it's very easy to think that you are meeting God when really you're just stuck in kind of these lower planes, not realizing that there's so much more beyond that. It's a little side note. Alright, back to it. The fourth 7-in-1 achievement is a double achievement because at one and the same time, the fourth and fifth knots are unfastened. The fourth and fifth folds disappear. The fourth and fifth root desires are crushed. Sorry, let me read that again with the numbers. The fourth 7-in-1 achievement is a double achievement because at one and the same time, 1, the fourth and fifth knots are unfastened. 2, the fourth and fifth folds disappear. 3, the fourth and fifth root desires are crushed. 4, the fourth and fifth deep dark colors vanish. 5, the fourth and fifth relative fundamental impressions are wiped out. 6, the fourth and fifth doors, as represented by the right and left ears, are passed through. And 7, the pilgrim arrives on the highest plane of the subtle sphere, the fourth plane. So this is like an Inception kind of deal. There's like 7 paths within the subtle world. I don't know. Maybe it'll explain it. As said before, the fourth plane is the plane of spiritual splendor and of the divine powers. Pilgrims advanced this far can, among many other things, even raise the unalived. They run a very grave risk of misusing these powers, thereby inviting disaster, and only a few can independently cross these dizzy heights safely without the aid of a perfect master. It is of them that Hafiz says, "On the threshold of the beloved, beware of the allurements of the heavens, lest you bring about your fall from the heights of progress and greatness to the depths of degradation and ruin." That's the end of quote. In such case, a man is not only deprived of the spiritual progress he has made on the path, but is thrown back from the position that he had achieved through physiological evolution to the state of the stone form. Just as anything may happen to a man traveling over an unknown path in the pitch blackness of night, so anything may happen to one who must pass through the fourth plane without the guiding hand of a perfect master. That is why, for all its dazzling splendor and power, the period of going through the fourth plane is termed the Christian mysticism, the dark night of the soul. So it sounds like those 7 steps are all within the fourth plane, perhaps? I don't know. If the advanced pilgrim is at all able to resist the allurements and treacheries of the dark night of the soul, he enters the mental sphere. By the 5th and final double 7-in-1 achievement, which occurs on the same lines as the 4th, all the folds of the veil are removed together with the relative knots, desires, colors, and impressions. The 6th and 7th doors, represented by right and left eyes, are crossed, and the 5th plane of light and love is reached. Yeah, oh, you're still with us? Heck yeah, dude. Awesome. Those who have safely arrived on the 5th plane are the Wali Allah, literally meaning friends of God. Their inner sight, or the third eye, is now fully developed, but even though all the 7 folds of the veil have disappeared, the veil itself is still there. The The pilgrim is therefore not yet face to face with God and cannot see the beloved. Because of their pure love for God, unadulterated by the false ego, the position of these pilgrims on the fifth plane is secure, and there's no possibility of retrogression. Without any harm to themselves, they can and do give, consciously or unconsciously, immense help to others in the subtle and gross spheres. With rare exceptions, further progress on one's own is now impossible. By the help of grace of a perfect master, one is able to remove the veil entirely and thereby arrive on the sixth plane, the highest plane of the mental sphere, the plane of divine sight, the entrance to divinity as represented by the forehead, where one is able actually to see God face to face, everywhere and in everything. This is known as conviction by sight. Hi, how are you? Sweet. I'm reading, in case you're wondering, God Speaks by Meher Baba. This is a very dense spiritual book. And I'm kind of towards the end of this chapter. There's one more page. This is talking about the spiritual path. Isabella, hi, how are you? All right, I'll continue on. Those on the gross sphere, gross means physical or three-dimensional, who believe in the existence of God have their conviction based on their pure and simple faith and belief. This conviction is intellectual conviction and is different from the distinctive convictions that follow. 1. Conviction by intuitive perception. 2. Conviction by sight. 3. Conviction by actual experience. Those on the path up through the fifth plane know there is God with a definite intuitive certainty. Their conviction is based on sure knowledge. Those on the sixth plane see God everywhere. Theirs is conviction by actual sight. Those on the seventh plane have become one with God, have conviction by actual experience. In reading this, I try to relate it to my life, being born only aware of the physical world, and then you start having thoughts, and then you start having feelings, which are described as higher planes of existence in here. I don't truly understand the difference between that and the spiritual path. Just a thought. The highly advanced pilgrim on the sixth plane is still within the domain of duality. Although face to face with God, the seer and the seen remain separated by a deep, fathomless valley which can be spanned only by the touch of a perfect master. Whereas the first 5 achievements are possible for man to obtain independently, the actual removal of the veil on the fifth plane is usually accomplished by the grace of a perfect master's guidance. The jump from illusion of the sixth plane to reality on the seventh plane is, however, impossible on one's own and entirely dependent upon the direct touch of a perfect one or a perfect master or Sadguru. Hi Devi, how are you? On the seventh plane, the plane of infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, the individual emerges into God and becomes God, a perfect one for all time and beyond all time. It is then immaterial whether the physical body remains or drops. As a rule, the gross shell falls within a short time after realization, but in some cases, the physical body holds on for a long time. These God-realized ones are known as Majzubs or Brahmi Bhoots. By the way, if you're just popping in and want to hear more of this, I am uploading these recordings to YouTube. So my channel is under the same name, Doomstrider. Back to it. Again, only by the direct and personal help of a perfect master does one from among these God-realized ones return to the level of ordinary man, regaining consciousness of all the spheres, gross, physical, subtle, and mental, yet retaining at the same time full God consciousness. He is then the man God, the perfect master, or Sadguru, or Kutub. So that would be the people who have achieved that would be like Jesus and Buddha and Allah and Meher Baba. Where there is light, darkness is no more. Where there is knowledge, ignorance is absent. And as the folds, the veil, and the valley of separation are all in the domain of ignorance, a perfect master who is the son of all, son is in quotes, like the sun, like the bright sun, not kid, who is the son of all knowledge, can, in the twinkling of an eye, impart God realization to anyone he chooses. Wow. God alone is real. And as we are permanently lodged in the divine beloved, we are all one. And that concludes part 7 of God Speaks. Thank you so much for sticking around through that, and for all your comments and likes. And Sky made it all the way through the whole thing. I'm very impressed. We are all one. We are all God's consciousness. And there's only a thin veil between us not knowing that and knowing that. That's right. You're a real seeker. And we're on the path. There's no going back now. So yes, thank you everyone. And I will say good night. Yes. All right. Good night.